Left-wingers like us often get annoyed when news hosts just focus on the disruption caused by strikes instead of the reasons workers strike in the first place. One political editor this week, though, was brave enough to tell the truth. Robert Peston is ITV's political editor, and this was his analysis of the latest offer to RMT rail workers. Our apologies for the low quality of this video, but I think it's worth it.
What's going to happen? Who's going to blink first? Because we've got the RMT boss tonight accusing the government of blocking any progress.
So one of the striking things is that a different bit of the rail dispute involving Network Rail, one union has settled for 5%, and even the RMT has put that offer to its members. It's recommended they reject it, but at least it's gone to their members. Now, that was 5%. The Rail Delivery Group, this is the big dispute that the RMT is saying no to, well, they're offering 4%. Now, in real terms, that represents a huge pay cut. Inflation running at 11%. Basically, they're asking the government, well, not the government, but the employers backed by the government are asking railway workers to take a 7% pay cut. And, they would argue they've been taking pay cuts in real terms for a long time. And they also complain about the quality of the service they provide. This is something I hear throughout the public services. You talk to nurses, they talk about years of pay cuts and declining services. You talk to teachers, you talk to the fire officers. Wherever you look, you get this heartfelt complaint from people providing vital services that they're just not valued anymore. And they say the government just doesn't get it. Now, we the public are suffering when these strikes go ahead. For what it's worth, when I talk to those at the RMT and in the industry, I don't think they want this thing to go on for much longer. They're losing money apart from anything else, and they don't want to ruin everybody's Christmas. But when I saw that 4% offer yesterday, I thought the government, for whatever reason, knew that this was going to prolong the strike. Maybe they think it's politically good for them. At the moment, unless the government and the employers move, I can't see us avoiding those strikes.
Fair play to Robert Peston there. Political editors, I think, the people who sort of cover this from the standpoint of politics, what they're always focusing on is disruption. Oh, there's this disruption. Will this be bad for the Tories that there's this disruption? Is Mick Lynch really Mick Grinch? And you have to ask him, do you feel bad about these people missing their trains? And they're sort of saying, how much damage is this going to do? How much damage is that going to do? Do you feel bad? Do you feel bad about this? How are you going to stop someone who has a stroke from getting an ambulance? And then they say, why have you felt the need to go on strike? They so rarely ask that question. But I think Robert Peston put really well there that, he put front and center there the reason people are going on strikes. And also that the government clearly aren't trying to avoid this, right? If you offer people a 4% pay increase when inflation is at 11%, why are they going to agree? It doesn't make any sense. If you have any leverage in your job at all, as the RMT do, why are you going to accept a real terms massive pay cut? More evidence that the Tories wouldn't or don't seem to be interested in a deal and wouldn't have expected the RMT to agree to the 4% offer is the conditions that were attached to it. So this was tweeted out from the RMT Twitter account. So this is their summary of the conditions. So I don't think it's sort of verbatim from a deal that was written down for them. But according to the RMT, the key points within the employer's proposals were that all workforce changes are accepted without reservation or industrial action, the closure of all ticket offices and displacement of all retail staff, creation of new multi-skilled station grades, a mass job severance program, driver-only operation of trains in all companies and all passenger services, new arrangements for mandatory Sunday working, a review of all on-train catering services leading to cutbacks in provision and jobs, review of fleet grades working practices and depot driving, flexible working contracts, working and rosters, mandatory adoption of new technology with no payment, new attendance management scheme, review of stood-off arrangements, new annual leave and sick pay arrangements. So essentially, take a big pay cut, and also we want you to accept that a bunch of people are going to get made unemployed, your conditions are massively going to change, and you won't get to strike because of that, because you've signed this deal. Why would anyone sign that deal? Robert Peston is not like a raving lefty. He's looked at that and said, of course they wouldn't sign that deal, and clearly the Tories knew they wouldn't sign that deal. Darling, what do you make of this? Why do you think the Tories would actively be provoking the RMT?
Well, what they've done there is they've offered a deal that they know that no union in their right mind would accept. And I think that was quite deliberate, because that way, again, that classic tactic of pitting the so-called general public against striking workers as if those aren't part, as if there isn't a clear cross section between those two groups. And the way that they do that is by saying, well, we offered them a deal and they haven't taken it. And it's because they're just ideologically driven. They just want to cause disruption. They want to ruin your Christmas, blah, blah, blah. And because, they rely on the fact that journalists like Robert Peston aren't going to talk about those finer grained details about okay, what would signing that deal actually look like for the future of those workers? Why wouldn't those workers want to sign a deal like that? And they rely on the fact that journalists typically don't go into those finer details and that people aren't going to kind of know those technicalities. And so then the thing that they can take away from that is my Christmas travel plans are disrupted and the workers are to blame for that, rather than the clear fact, which is that the government has created and bosses have created completely unworkable conditions in the sector, leaving these workers with no choice but to pull out their leveraging power in order to get better conditions. And the fact that hearing this from Robert Peston, because let's not forget, as you said, Peston is not this raging lefty, and he didn't even really bring his own sort of analysis or spin so much to it. All he did was literally state facts and just be like, this is what this deal means from a worker perspective in hard numbers. This is the kind of real terms pay cut it means. This is the percentage that it evens out to. And the fact that that is so unusual to us is such an indictment of our media and how it covers industrial relations, because essentially most of the time, the vast majority of the time, journalists allow themselves to essentially only be briefed by the government and by bosses. And the fact that it seems like Peston has, for once in his life, allowed himself to be briefed by the unions and to say, look, this is what this struggle looks like from our point of view, it's almost the exception that proves the rule. But I also want to put this into perspective, and the fact that Peston has not been radicalized or anything. He's still, like a lot of other mainstream journalists, is fundamentally drinking the Kool-Aid of the bosses and the Tory government. Last night he went on this really ill-informed Twitter thread where he talked about how, the government can't pay public sector workers more because they've run out of money and it would basically create a wage price spiral. Those are two bona fide economic myths that are peddled by employers and the government in order to justify the fact that we haven't seen a real terms pay rise in so long. The British government doesn't run out of money. Our entire global financial system is basically set up to ensure that governments like the British government in the global north can extract and create money for things that they want to spend money on. If they can come up with 300 million to pay Michelle Mone to make some PPE that doesn't work, they can find money to pay public sector workers for the essential work that they do. The problem is that the government that we live under doesn't want to pay public sector workers a decent wage. And I think, when it comes to that question of, the kinds of lines that the government uses in order to justify why it doesn't pay public sector workers what they deserve, it's important to remember that the Conservative Party doesn't believe that a public sector should really exist other than in a very small number of cases, because the Conservative government see, for example, the fact that we have a public healthcare system as essentially a way of gatekeeping money-making opportunities from them and their rich mates. They don't like the idea that we have some parts of our economy are in the public sector. So why would they therefore be interested in subsidizing and paying for and improving that sector? What they want to do is engineer crisis and dysfunction in order to lay the groundwork to try and privatize at least parts of these sectors and open up and unlock the sector to become a lucrative money-making asset.
The one to listen out for on the news reports, I love they always say, they do this especially on the BBC, they say, workers have rejected a 5% pay increase, which they say is a real terms pay cut. It's like, no, it is a real terms pay cut. You don't have to be particularly good at maths. If inflation is 11%, and the pay rise is 5%, then that is a real terms pay cut. You can't say which the unions say is a real terms pay cut. No, it's a real terms pay cut. The unions say they're not going to accept it, but don't make it seem like whether or not this is a real terms pay cut is just a matter of opinion. Surely there are enough people working at the BBC that someone can work out that that is a real terms pay cut.